evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this event. I'm glad you could make it, even though it's a very cold, damp, rainy day in Newcastle. A usual day, I would say. Thanks for coming out this evening. I'm sure you've been looking forward to the event today. We're going to make a start. We actually wanted to start exactly at 5 to the second, but due to technology, always has a way of disappointing you at the last moment. But I think we're still good for time. Before I hand over to the person who's going to be moderating today, I just thought I should just give a little bit of little speech to welcome you all, to say a little bit about the people who organized this event that I'm representing. We're a group of young people, mostly university students from Newcastle University and Northumbria in Newcastle City. And every year we run some sort of series of youth events for young people. We're based up in Fenham. We are affiliated with the local church. And we felt that as part of our event this year, we're going to do something different and to engage with people in the community. One of the things I found out as a young person who is a Christian, meeting people from other sort of worldviews, is many times young people always feel, some people feel that we as Christians do not like to engage or have conversations with other people, but I do. That's not necessarily true. And I think that this event is a pointer to the fact that as people who have religious views and those who have non-religious views, we can have good conversations. I want to first of all express my gratitude to those who are going to be speaking this evening for taking up the opportunity, for actually taking up our invitation. Round of applause for Mike Turner and Angelos Sofocleous. I hope I got the pronunciation right. They're from the Northeast Humanists, and I really want to express my gratitude for actually accepting our invitation. I also want to recognize Dr. Nick Megoran from Newcastle University and Jonathan McLatchie as well, who is, I think, still affiliated one way or the other with Newcastle University. Please a round of applause for them. Thanks for joining. All right, I think enough of me now. You're going to have a very wonderful evening. You're not here to hear me ramble on. We're here to have a debate. So without further ado, I'm going to call on the moderator for this evening, a very good friend of mine who kind of reluctantly, because he's a very busy guy, he's an entrepreneur, a businessman, but he eventually accepted to moderate this evening. Philip, please let's give a round of applause for him as he comes forward. I hope you're around the way for you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Tolu, for making me look bad. I really want to thank everyone for coming out today, and the value of seeing so many faces, so many diverse people with various relationships that exist on this planet. The fact that we are here shows that we do believe or want to learn something today. For me, that is great because I would get the opportunity to engage, to learn, to listen to people with various experiences and various point of views about life itself and how we can further engage to become better human beings. Let's even keep it at that simple base point. And that is the reason why I chose to do this, because I thought maybe I am too biased in my point of view of how I see the world, and an opportunity to basically learn, an opportunity to just open my own horizon to see what's beyond my nose. And I hope everyone here comes with that same open-mindedness to just come and see, think, learn, have the opportunity to engage and relate, and have decorum as well, because there will be point of views where you might not agree to or strongly disagree with, but being able to see where the person is coming from and being able to engage and learn and see how we can better coexist as humans on this planet. So without any further ado, I want to make introduction of the speakers briefly, and then we'll have our first set of speakers. So I'm going to start from this is my right, from my right here. Can you stand up and introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Angelos from the Hi everyone, I'm Angelos from the University of Durham. I have completed my degree at the University of Durham in philosophy and psychology. I specifically did my dissertation on the philosophy of miracles. I'm using a particular definition of miracles. I tried to show that miracles are not possible. And now I'm doing my master's at the University of Durham in philosophy, focusing on philosophy of religion, phenomenology, and philosophy of art.
Thank you, Angelos. And our second speaker, one of the speakers we have today is Mike. I'll let Mike introduce himself.
Hi. I'm the chair of North East Humanists, and I spent 30 years working in industry as a scientist and manager prior to relatively early retirement, and I've been doing all sorts of things since then, a lot of charity work and DIY, and yeah, that's me.
Nice to meet you, Mike. We have Jonathan, am I correct? Sorry, that's Jonathan. My apologies, guys, you see, it's going to happen a lot.
Apparently the organisers were looking for an old person and a young person from each side, and I'm the old person. I'm Nick Megoran. I'm a geography lecturer over at Newcastle. My research is on Central Asia, former Soviet Union. What happens when you make a new boundary in a new country where there wasn't one before? That's the research I look at. And it's the first time I've been in a debate, so smile at me, even if you're critiquing me.
Thank you. And Jonathan, my apologies.
Well, I'm Jonathan McLatchie. I've just submitted my PhD thesis a couple of months ago in the field of cell and evolutionary biology. I have an academic interest in the sciences, a master's in evolutionary biology, and a master's in molecular biology. And I'm also interested in questions of design and nature, evidence of design from the natural sciences, in particular the life sciences. And I've also in recent years become very interested in biblical scholarship. And I run a ministry called the Apologetics Academy. You can find it at apologetics-academy.org. And I basically promote an intelligent, reflective, and evidence-based Christian faith.
Thank you very much. So those are going to be our speakers for tonight, guys. A round of applause for them, please. So we have a public debate, and the public debate is to answer one question. Is God necessary for life to have meaning? And I encourage everyone in here to have an open mind, to reflect, to think, to have your point of views, and have your questions written down, because there'll be opportunity to engage with the speakers and have your point of view on how things are going to be said tonight. So without making any further ado, I will invite the first speaker in the affirmation of the conversation, the debate on is God necessary, Jonathan McLatchie.
Well, thank you. It's great to see so many of you out here tonight to discuss this most important, age-old and timeless question of, is God necessary to live a life of value, meaning and purpose? Now, before we begin, I'm going to just spend a few minutes to define our terms that we're going to be using this evening, because it's very important that we know what actually are we discussing. What do we mean by those terms value, meaning and purpose? So let's start with value then. Well, value can be taken in one of two ways. It could be taken as the proposition that the positive moral value of some actions is greater than some other actions. It could also be taken to mean that humans are endowed with intrinsic moral value and worth. What about purpose and meaning? How can we understand those terms this evening? Well, purposes can be cosmic, and by that I mean ultimate and transcendent, or they can be local, such as my purpose in life is to pursue a family, to pursue a career, and so forth. Now, for the purpose of our discussion this evening, I'm going to be talking about cosmic purpose and meaning. That is ultimate and transcendent purpose and meaning. I'm going to say from the outset that I'm assuming that the question of our debate this evening is not a stupid question. If we're simply here to discuss can you invent your own personal subjective meaning and purpose for your life, well, that can be granted readily. I grant that quickly. The question rather that is more interesting is, can atheism provide us with a rational justification for asserting that there can be objective purpose and meaning to our lives? So, what are our contentions this evening? I'm going to put forward 5 basic contentions, and my colleague and I will be discussing those 5 basic contentions over the course of our presentations this evening. 1. Atheism cannot properly ground any notion of intrinsic moral value. 2. Atheism cannot provide justification for objective moral norms and values. 3. Atheism cannot provide justification for objective meaning and purpose. 4. Only by embracing the truth of the gospel can we actually fulfill the objectively prescribed purpose for our lives. And 5. A world in which the search for meaning is near universal is itself a clue to the existence of God. So let's then deal with the first of those, which is the topic of value. Now I'm going to suggest that objective moral norms and values cannot be grounded apart from God, apart from a creator. Now there are 2 senses in which something could be considered good. Something can be good in a pragmatic sense, that which is the most effective means for obtaining some desired outcome. So for example, if we desire to eat an ice cream cone, without getting ice cream on our clothes, it is good to start eating from the top of the cone rather than the bottom. This kind of goodness is judged by something's utility. It is considered good because it works well, and the human subject values the fact that it works well. We might call this kind of goodness pragmatic goodness. Secondly, something can also be good in the sense that it has intrinsic moral virtue or character. We might call this kind of goodness moral goodness. This is the kind of goodness moral philosophers have in mind when they talk about objective morality. For example, it's good to save someone from drowning. This kind of goodness is judged by the intrinsic moral character of the act itself, rather than its utility. Indeed, risking one's life to save a stranger has little utility for the rescuer, but great moral virtue nonetheless. This sort of goodness is not determined by what we desire or the value we attach to the outcome, but is rooted in the moral character of the act itself, wholly independent of what the human may think about it. Now, to say that a moral value is objective is to say its truth value does not depend on any human knower. For instance, to say that killing Jews simply because of their ethnicity is immoral in an objective sense is to say that killing Jews is wrong, whether anyone believes it or not. If Hitler had won the war, the Second World War, and eliminated everyone that thought that the Holocaust was immoral, such that everyone now believed it was moral, it would still, in fact, be immoral. So, I'm going to contend then that objective moral norms and values sit far more comfortably, sit far better at home within a theistic universe than in a non-theistic universe. Now let's come to the second way that the concept of value could be taken. Now I want to ask my humanist friends who are with us tonight to address this question, and I'm hoping that they can help me out with this in the rebuttal period. Is this child intrinsically morally valuable? And if they say that it is intrinsically morally valuable, my next question is why? Can you ground that within your worldview? I would contend that it cannot be grounded within an atheistic, humanistic paradigm. My next question I want to ask our humanist friends this evening is which of these on the screen here has the greatest intrinsic moral value? This human baby we see on the left, or the slug we see on the right? Which has the greater intrinsic moral value? What is the metric that we are using to measure intrinsic moral value and worth? Are we saying that it's simply cognitive capability, cognitive function that defines moral value and worth? If that is the case, then are we prepared to say this evening that if someone has a stroke and they lose part of their cognitive capability, that they somehow lose part of their intrinsic moral value and worth? I hope that no one will be prepared to say that this evening. But what about the concept of purpose and meaning? Can we ground that properly in a non-theistic worldview? Well, it may come as a surprise, perhaps, to learn that actually this isn't merely a debate that has atheists on one side and theists on the other. In fact, many atheist thinkers over the years have come to the same conclusions on this matter that I have, namely, that purpose and meaning, at least objective purpose and meaning, cannot be properly grounded within the atheistic framework. For example, Richard Dawkins, one of our time's great theologians, or not, in his book, A River Out of Eden, published in 1995, he writes, and I quote, "In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. As that unhappy poet A.E. Housman put it, for nature, heartless, witless nature, will neither know nor care. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music." And so you can see that Dawkins, who is a patron of the British Humanist Association, agrees with the contention that we're putting forward on this side of the debate this evening, namely, that objective purpose and meaning cannot be grounded apart from God. Let's go to another British atheist thinker, British philosopher Julian Baggini. A few years ago, 2012, he published this article in The Guardian, and the title is, "Yes, Life Without God Can Be Bleak. Atheism is about facing up to that." In the article, he says, atheists are quite rightly keen to counter the accusation that life without God cannot be moral. The British Humanist Association, for instance, claims that, quote, "right and wrong can be explained by human nature alone and do not require religious teaching," end quote. But, just as with happiness, there is a need to distinguish the possibility of atheist morality from its inevitable actuality. Anyone who thinks it's easy to ground ethics either hasn't done much moral philosophy or wasn't concentrating when they did. Although morality is arguably just as murky for the religious, at least there is some bedrock belief that gives a reason to believe that morality is real and will prevail. In an atheist universe, morality can be rejected without external sanction at any point and without a clear, compelling reason to believe in its reality. That's exactly what will sometimes happen. So I think it's time we atheists fessed up and admitted that life without God can sometimes be pretty grim. Now, you might ask at this point, well, why do you, Jonathan, think that objective purpose and meaning cannot be grounded in an atheistic worldview? I'm just going to offer you two arguments, and my colleague Nick is going to give us some more arguments when he gets to the podium. So let me just give you my first argument. And I'm going to present this in terms of a logical structure, philosophical syllogism, if you will. My first premise is that either theism is true, theism is the belief that God exists, or naturalism is true, the belief that the natural world is all that there is, or non-naturalistic atheism is true. Believe it or not, there are actually non-naturalistic forms of atheism, such as a view called moral Platonism, which maintains that there are these abstract entities which exist in some Platonic realm. This is a concept of the Greek philosopher Plato. And that objective morality and purpose and meaning can be grounded in that sort of system. My second premise is that a naturalistic universe is one in which there is truly no objective meaning or purpose. On atheism, the universe is headed towards a heat death in which the universe has evolved to a state of no thermodynamic free energy, and therefore can no longer sustain processes that increase entropy. This means that temperature differences or other processes may no longer be exploited to perform work. On naturalistic atheism, there is no objective meaning or purpose baked into the fabric of the universe. Indeed, I contend that the only two viable sources for objective human values is a personal God whose very nature is good, or objects in some Platonic realm on an atheistic system. So my third premise is that non-naturalistic versions of atheism, such as moral Platonism, suffer from many problems that make them really implausible. Now, because of the constraints of time this evening, I'm not going to discuss this in my opening statement. However, if we need to later on in the rebuttal, I'm happy to get into some of the problems and deficiencies of that view. My fourth premise is there is nothing about generic theism per se that makes objective meaning or purpose unlikely. And therefore, the conclusion that follows from the premises that therefore the existence of objective meaning and purpose points in the direction of theism. And so I think it's best explained as on a theistic worldview rather than an atheistic worldview. So then let's come to my second argument this evening. This is my first premise. If Christianity is true, then necessarily your purpose is grounded in God. My second premise, if necessarily your purpose is grounded in God, then it's not possible that these two things are true together. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. Third premise is that Christianity is true. And the conclusion that therefore follows from the premise is that therefore it's not possible that these two things are true together. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. So then let's come to defend each of the three premises. Start with the first one. If Christianity is true, then necessarily your purpose is grounded in God. Now, according to the Bible, what is the purpose of humanity? What is the purpose of mankind? Well, we can turn to the Bible and we can look at the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12 and verse 13, where Solomon writes, "Now all has been heard, here is the conclusion of the matter. Revere God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of humanity." If then the Bible is true, that is the objective purpose that is prescribed for us. That is the purpose for which we were made. The Westminster Confession encapsulates this truth this way. It says, "Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever." Now, this might sound a bit strange to some of you if you're atheists here tonight, or humanists. God made us to glorify him? God made us to worship him? Has God got an ego problem or something like that? Has he got an overinflated ego? Is he very egotistic and very needy insofar as he needs creatures such as ourselves to worship him and to stroke his ego? Well, C.S. Lewis, who is a very famous British theologian and author, very famous for his Chronicles of Narnia, which you might have read, he addressed this objection that often comes up. He writes, and this is in his reflections on the Psalms, he says, "I think we delight to praise what we enjoy, because the praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. It is not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. The delight is incomplete till it is expressed." He goes on, "It is frustrating to have discovered a new author, and not to be able to tell anyone how good he is. To come suddenly at the turn of the road, upon some mountain valley of unexpected grandeur, and then to have to keep silent because the people with you care for it no more than for a tin can in the ditch, to hear a good joke and find no one to share it with. The Scotch Catechism says that man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But we shall then know that these are the same thing. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. In commanding us to worship him, God is inviting us to enjoy him. This is the purpose of life according to the Christian worldview. This is the purpose for which each of you individually were made." Then let's come to my second premise. If necessarily your purpose is grounded in God, then it's not possible that these two things are true together. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. This should be self-evident that if indeed it is true that your purpose really is grounded in God, then the two propositions cannot be true together, that you have no purpose, that you have purpose, and that no God exists. So let's come to my third premise, that Christianity is true. But you might ask at this point, well, how can we know that Christianity is true? And this really gets to the heartbeat of why I am a Christian before you this evening. I am not a Christian because it gives my life a sense of meaning and purpose, ultimately. I am not a Christian because it gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling or because I'm afraid of death. I stand before you this evening as one who is a Christian because I value truth. And I am persuaded by the public evidence that Christianity is true. Now, the case for Christianity is cumulative in nature. So if you're looking for a single spectacular piece of evidence that proves Christianity, some silver bullet argument, I am sorry to disappoint you this evening. I contend, however, that the evidence for Christianity, when considered cumulatively, is very, very compelling. Such that I am convinced that the person who is fully informed and doing his best to be fair and objective with the evidence will, in the long run, become persuaded of its truth. Let me just run through a few categories of evidence for Christianity. I'm not going to go into detail because of the constraints of time. However, if you would like to know more about the evidence for Christianity, simply ask about it in the Q&A. I'll be very happy to go into more detail. Or come to speak to me at the end, and I'll be very happy to talk about it further. We have evidences for the New Testament documents being based on substantially reliable testimony of eyewitnesses who were habitually truthful, those things on which we can cross-check them to get right. For example, the category of undesigned coincidences, where you basically have multiple sources of the same event which interlock and dovetail in a way that points to truth. And extra-biblical corroborations, where you have something inside the biblical account which is corroborated or illuminated upon by some extra-biblical source. We also have the evidences for the bodily resurrection of Jesus. I was speaking about this topic in Edinburgh this morning, about the public evidences for the bodily resurrection of Jesus, which I would contend is overwhelming. If indeed the Gospels, as I contend that they are based on substantially trustworthy eyewitness testimony, then we have to take seriously what they say about the nature of the resurrection appearances of Jesus, namely that they were multi-sensory, involving multiple sensory modes, not just sight, but physical touch, group conversations, hearing, etc. And it was extended across 40 days, not just one brief confusing episode. So I think that the evidences for the bodily resurrection of Jesus are very compelling. We also have, I think, very strong evidence, cumulative evidence, for the divine inspiration of Scripture. Some patterns of evidence that point to this, in my opinion, are what I call intricate harmonies. I don't have time to get into that right now. And predictive prophecy. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. So now let me finish with this. There are three questions of any journey. As I mentioned, I came from Edinburgh this morning for this debate. Three questions that need to be asked. Where am I? Where am I going? And how am I going to get there? The Bible gives us an honest assessment of these three questions in life. Where am I? Where am I going? How am I going to get there? Atheistic humanism is at best vague, subjective, and unaccountable. It lacks purpose and meaning and is based on how we would like it to be. Insofar that humanism tries to affirm objective value, ethics, meaning, and purpose, it draws on borrowed capital. For these notions can only properly be grounded in a transcendent creator. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, John. That was exciting. I'll leave the question after we get a review to comment from. So, can we give a round of applause for Angelos?
Hi everyone. Good afternoon to Chair, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for New Life Youth for hosting us here tonight. It is my conviction that the question whether there can be meaning, value, and purpose in life without the idea of God can be associated with the question of whether human beings can act within a moral framework which allows them to perform moral good actions. I will therefore approach this question by exploring whether human beings can act morally without the idea of God, and henceforth whether they can have a life of meaning without the idea of God. I would like to begin by asking you to imagine a world void of any sentient beings, a universe in which consciousness or free will do not even exist as concepts. Try to imagine our universe in its initial stages, a few million years after the Big Bang. Now try to explore the moral status of that universe. Where are moral truths to be found? Is it wrong to lie? Is it wrong to commit adultery? Is it wrong to kill? A few billion years after, the first organisms have developed, and long after that, the first animals. Try to picture the life of those animals. They gather in small groups, they kill for food, they reproduce. But do they commit any morally wrong acts? Or are they capable of committing any morally wrong acts? Straightforwardly, the answer is no. These animals do cause harm with their actions, but they cannot be held morally accountable for their actions. They have no cognitive capacity to recognize what is morally right from what is morally wrong. Any action in which these animals engage, however, is directly connected to their or their group's survival, and they have no concept of morality which is independent from these causes. That said, there is still no moral framework in that universe, and moral truths are nowhere to be found simply because they do not exist. There is no sentient being whose existence allows it to act either morally or immorally. It is nonsensical to ask whether it is immoral that a dinosaur had sex with another dinosaur's partner, or whether it is immoral that a mammoth stole from another mammoth's area, or whether there is some bird that killed another bird to feed its own family. This would be immoral in our terms, with reference to human societies, but this cannot be said about those animals that existed then. Now, a few million years after the first Homo sapiens, that is us, appeared, the core structure of community becomes increasingly social, as evolutionary strong social bonds are by far more conducive to survival than individualistic bonds. Understanding ourselves as members of the social group, however, forced us to undertake certain duties within our social sphere, duties which were instrumental to the survival and safety of our group. Our own safety and survival were no longer solely our own project, but were part of the safety and survival of our group. If we now try to assess whether a moral framework exists in that universe, we start to see something. We can see that in order to secure the safety of the group and the well-being and survival of the members of the group, there are certain rules that start developing, while the concept of individual freedom starts gaining ground as a fundamental aspect of the group. With respect to the survival of the group, it is understood that murder, for example, is inherently wrong. In evolutionary terms, a group which does not allow its members to murder each other is favorable to a group which allows its members to murder each other. There now is a reference point with which we can refer to when we examine the universe and try to determine whether it includes any moral framework. This point is none else other than human beings themselves. This emergence of morality comes together with the cognitive evolution of Homo sapiens. However, one might argue that a newborn universe still contains meaning, a meaning provided by God. However, there are several problems with that view which need to be addressed before readily accepting this argument. This argument simply states that if God exists, then life has meaning. Now, following philosophical logic, the sentence, if God exists, then life has meaning, can be rephrased as, if A, then B. A being the antecedent, that is that God exists, and B being the consequent, that is that life has meaning. So given the structure of an argument, if A, then B, there are two logical fallacies which are often committed by theists. The first is called denying the antecedent, that is denying A, that God exists, and arguing that this leads to also denying B, when this is not the case. Through the argument, if God exists, then life has meaning, it does not follow from the statement, God does not exist, that life has no meaning. The affirmation of B leads, or better follows, to the affirmation of A, but the negation of A does not lead to the negation of B. The second logical fallacy that is committed is called affirming the consequent, that is, affirming B, that life has meaning, and arguing that this leads to the affirmation of A. So through the argument, if God exists, then life has meaning, it does not follow from the statement, life has meaning, that God exists. Even if God exists, the statement that his existence gives meaning or value to our lives does not follow, and it is simply an example of a non sequitur fallacy. A non sequitur fallacy is committed when one supports an argument whose conclusion, that is, that life has meaning, does not logically follow from its premise, that is, that there is a God. So going back to the comparison between the two universes, we can see that morality has developed through nature, through evolution by natural selection, and through our individual and groups' need for safety and survival. Moral values cannot be found anywhere in the universe, but can only be found with reference to the human experience and taking into consideration human societies. In order to understand how human societies came to form rules and laws, I will refer to an important concept within political philosophy, the social contract. The social contract theory proposed by the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes refers to an imaginary yet applicable contract that is being signed by members of a community, typically nowadays a state or a country, which lays down certain rules that all members of the community ought to follow by virtue of them being members of that community and enjoying its merits. Individuals agree to certain rules and subsequently give up some of their freedoms in order to secure the safety and survival of individuals in the group, including themselves and also the group itself. Thus, breaking the social contract leads to punishment by the rest of society. It does not lead to chaos. Hence, the social contract and the concept of morality evolved simultaneously, and subsequently the concepts of meaning, value, and purpose also began to emerge. The great French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre phrased this notion as existence precedes essence. Contrary to any objects or other beings, Sartre argued, humans first exist and then they ascribe essence to their existence. This freedom of each man to provide essence to his own existence disappears with the idea of God, which establishes a predetermined meaning. We can see then that morality or meaning, we are not things which existed before humans, but they are notions that appeared along with individual and social developments in human societies. That being the case, there is no meaning in life beyond what is humanly realized, and there is no meaning which is discoverable, but can only be invented according to the wants and needs of individuals and social groups. We are free to create our own meaning in life, and are not bound by any meaning or a priori moral values, a priori being the philosophical term which refers to a statement which can be true or false independent of experience. This realization, however, that humans are free to insert and find their own meaning in life and create communally a moral framework to which they all abide is not easy to accept. Jean-Paul Sartre had pointed out this realization by stressing that humans feel terror when confronted with the possibility that there is no God. They feel that they are in a bottomless abyss with no direction or purpose. Now, being faced with the possibility that there is no meaning in life, humans face what Sartre, influenced by the Danish existentialist philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, called anguish, a form of terror, stress, and anxiety. Both Kierkegaard and Sartre deal with a particular instance of anguish in the Bible, in the story in which an angel commands Abraham to kill his son. But anyone in such a case, says Sartre, would wonder first whether it was indeed an angel, and secondly, whether I am really Abraham. Where are the proofs? If an angel appears to me, what is the proof that it's an angel? If I hear voices, or who can prove that they proceed from heaven and not from hell, or from my own subconsciousness, or some pathological condition? Who can prove that they are really addressed to me? Some people's readiness to accept some predetermined meaning in life and the fact that they subscribe to such a meaning without hesitation is what Sartre called bad faith. In order to escape this meaningless and directionless abyss, this anguish, people claim to discover some predetermined meaning, in this case, God, and thus excuse themselves out from having to invent their own meaning in life, a long and much painful procedure. It is much easier to claim that meaning exists independently of us and support that we do not have to do anything other than just discover that meaning, than try to invent that meaning ourselves. In making a particular argument, in this case about life's meaning, we need to have a reference point upon which we base a statement's truth. Religion, or the idea of God, is just one out of many reference points that one can use for looking for meaning in life, but one that nevertheless often comes out of ignorance. The reference point by which different religions are examined must always be outside religions themselves, and that cannot be found anywhere apart from the individual human being. We can never escape examining morality, meaning through our own subjectivist approach. Yet at the same time, we must be convinced that there are right and wrong answers to be given. Various other theories of moral action, other reference points, show that it is possible to leave God or religion out of the equation and still act morally and still have meaning, value, and purpose in our lives. For example, Sartre suggests that man is obliged at every instant to perform actions which are examples. Everything happens to every man as though the whole human race had its eyes fixed upon what he is doing and regulated its conduct accordingly. When we say that man chooses himself, we do mean that every one of us must choose himself. But by that we also mean that in choosing for himself, he also chooses for all men. This is an incredibly humane point, a reminder to all of us that we are all members of the human race and that we all have an obligation to act in a way in which we are an example to each other human being. As members of the human race, every act of us becomes an act of humanity. And when we choose for ourselves, we also choose for the whole of humanity. And when we commit ourselves to something, we also commit humanity to it. This form of the universality of human actions is also seen in the works of other philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant, whose categorical imperatives outline certain principles of action which dictate human behavior. Two of those categorical imperatives being the formula of universality, which states, act as if the maxims of your actions were to become through your will the universal law of nature. And the formula of humanity, which states, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. However, let's take a step back and assume for a moment that the thesis is right. Let's assume that God exists and that it's only through God that one can find meaning, value, and purpose in their lives. Then further problems and logical fallacies appear, because in accepting that the argument God is necessary for meaning, value, and purpose in our lives, the question that immediately arises is this: which God? Is it the God of the Bible, the God of the Quran? Might it be the ancient Egyptian or ancient Greek gods? We are unable to successfully address this question without engaging in circularity and without in the end resort to asking ourselves, what would I do? There is no moment in which we do not employ our own reasoning in following or not following a particular God or deity. When saying that something is immoral, that's not just because God says so, but because we, through our rational capacity, make that judgment. In case you feel that you need to act morally or think that without the idea of God you wouldn't be able to establish as an individual human being a form of meaning for your life, I would ask you to consider whether you only act morally because God tells you so, or because of fear of God, or because you fear that otherwise you are going to spend eternity in hell, or because you are convinced that you are a sinful human being who must go through a lifelong catharsis in order to be rewarded in an afterlife. This is not to deny that religions can offer good moral guidance, but it must be said that first, religions emerged from the human realization of morality, not the other way around, as they aimed at codifying morality, dictating moral rules, and enforcing them. And second, that one cannot jump from the fact that religions offer good moral guidance for the case of the existence of God. But let's say that we have established that the God of Christianity is the one and only God, and the Bible that is the one and only holy book, which we must follow in order to act and to find meaning in our lives. So then another question arises: which parts of the Bible do we follow? I am very certain that we should not follow the following sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, and slavery-promoting verses. Deuteronomy 25:11-12. If two men are fighting and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, you shall cut off your hand, show your no pity. Exodus 21:7-8. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years as the men are. If she does not please the man who bought her, he may allow her to be bought back again. Romans 1:27. In the same way, also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. The men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Peter 2:18. Slaves, submit yourselves to your masters with all respect, not only to the good one and gentle, but also to the cruel. I am certain that we cannot cherry pick among those verses, especially if we consider the Bible to be the Word of God, an infallible being. And certainly we cannot follow the Bible word for word, for then we would be taken back to the dark ages of Christianity, or we would perform morally reprehensible actions. There are two responses that are often given to those verses. The first one being that they are taken out of context, to which there is a single reply. They are not. The ways in which the Bible endorses slavery, misogyny, homophobia, and sexism are clear. The second response is to say that the Bible was written in a different era, therefore it reflects the social rules of that period. And I agree with this. The Bible was written by humans like us who could not see beyond the moral rules of their era, and therefore included numerous reprehensible rules in the text showing that the Bible is merely human creation. Whatever our answer may be to which parts of the Bible do we follow, we see that we judge what is right and what is not through the lenses of Christianity, nor through what God wants, but with a non-supernatural and merely humanistic conception of human life. We are only able to avoid following those particular verses of the Bible because we employ our own human rational reasoning over the idea of God. Religions do not have any kind of monopoly, either in the moral sphere or in the question of whether meaning is only possible in life through God. Religion does not provide the unique basis for meaning, and it is neither sufficient nor necessary for meaning. Through our common need for safety and survival, and fostered by our evolutionary past, we are free as human beings to establish our own meaning in life, always with consideration to other human beings, and always respecting the rights and obligations we have as members of human societies.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's been very interesting, isn't it? Lots of thought process going through people's minds, and I could tell people's faces squinching and changing, and people agreeing and disagreeing to things. So I'll invite Angela to the stage, please. Come grab a seat. And grab a seat. So guys, we are going to have a quick interaction with our first two speakers. May I ask, I'll probably go first with the questions because I have so many questions written out. So I would like everyone as well to come across with your questions and let me know. Tolu, can you handle the mic, please? I think the first question I probably want to ask is, so how do we determine right or wrong? That's the first question. What do you think? How do we determine what is right and what is wrong?
Sure, that's a great question. As a Christian, I think that we all have a conscience. We have God's moral law written on our hearts. That's a biblical metaphor, where God is actually impressed upon us a knowledge of right and wrong. So that's actually what the word conscience means. I mean, in Latin, with knowledge, right? I think that for a lot of things we know it intuitively. We have that moral law that's written on our hearts, and then there's also biblical instruction as to right and wrong as well.
So that's admittedly a difficult question to see how morality can provide some solid grounds of what is objectively right or wrong. But it does seem to me that we have some innate sense that we want to give people as much pleasure as possible and as little harm as possible. If we imagine a world full of pleasure and happiness, is of course preferable to a world where pain is the main
feeling of people. And it seems that this is innate about our being and in the way we form our human societies. It has been conducive to our survival and well-being of our species to act in those ways in which we are moral. And what is moral is something that we can find in how we act and also how we come to coexist as human beings. And in the end, it does not go back to religion or God or to any ideology, but in the end it's back to us. And it is us that we keep ourselves from committing morally wrong acts and not that we follow any sort of text or verse from the Bible or any other holy book. And if we think that without the idea of God and without commandments or someone or fearing punishment, if we do not commit morally right actions, if we think that in that way we would commit morally wrong actions, then I think we should be concerned about our humanity.
Thank you, Angelo. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Oh yeah, there's one person. Wow, there are loads of people actually, so it's going to be fun. Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Claire. So, you're saying, Angelo, that morals are based on the good of humanity. But I was wondering if there are some things that we value that don't relate to the good of humanity. For example, like being a reliable person, or just things that don't seem to facilitate either pleasure or the advancement of humanity. So I was wondering if you thought that there could be like an objective moral that isn't based on either pleasure or evolutionary advance.
Angela, you want to take that?
So sure, you mentioned being reliable, and as I mentioned in my speech, it's always helpful to see what is, of course it does not really provide pleasure or harm, but we can imagine we can go back to our primitive stages as species and try to see two communities. So one community has people who are reliable towards each other and always tell the truth, and in the other community people often tell lies, so they're considered as unreliable human beings. So in this sense, if I ask you which community is going to evolve and survive, it's of course a community which always tells the truth and always is being reliable, which are of course values that Christianity also values and promotes. But we can see that through evolutionary terms, not evolutionary in terms of us, of our genes or us individuals, if we see the evolution of social groups, then we see which values are conducive to the evolution of a social group. And we can detect which values for the individuals and also for the group are helpful and also moral. Now, in determining which truths, which values are objectively good, it is certainly a difficult question, and one that neither philosophy nor science nor theology can answer at the moment. And I am particularly skeptical as to how we can form an argument that could show, for example, that could convince us that, for example, murder is wrong. Of course, we can say that murder is wrong and that in evolutionary terms murder is wrong, but I'm skeptical as to how we can form a solid and concrete argument to show that. And I'm also skeptical about whether theology or the idea of God can provide that as God cannot be directly connected to an objective moral truth. These are two distinct concepts. An objective moral truth does not provide existence of God, and the existence of God does not provide objective moral truths.
Jonathan?
Sure. I'll pick up on that last point. He said that objective moral truths do not require that God exists. I mean, I think that if God does not exist, if you are assuming atheism, I think you have no standard above and beyond yourself to point to. It's just merely my opinion versus Hitler's opinion as to whether the Holocaust was right. There's really no way of actually objectively assessing whether a particular action is right or wrong, rather than this being a subjective preference. Well, my purpose in life is to help the needy and help the homeless and provide for widows or what have you. And the other person's meaning and purpose in life is to kill people and is a serial killer. Well, how do we determine which of those is moral and which one is not moral? How do we discern and discriminate between those competing purposes in life? What happens when our purposes and meanings in life conflict? If we have no standard above and beyond ourselves to point to and appeal to, there's no way that we can that it can be objective in any sense at all.
Thank you. One more question from the lab, please. Do introduce yourself and ask a question.
My name is Sam. My question goes to Angelo. I have two questions for you, Angelo. The first one, you did mention the fact that our morality is a product of evolution. And the concept of evolution presupposes the fact that things came out of nothing. How does things like atoms and things which, of course, has no previous existence, be able to bring about the issue of what I call it morality? And the second question which I have for you, tied to the first one, is you said it is possible to leave God out of humanity to have a reference point. I beg to differ on that point because it's not possible, because you take, for instance, I'm approaching a red traffic light and it comes out red and I decide to stop. And somebody is coming behind me and decide to move past me. Now, there are two possible suggestions. Either my car is still moving in spite of me stopping, or the person who actually had just gone past me flouted the rule. So what I need at that point in time is to look at something that does not move. I look at a tree or a building. That's my reference point. Now, when you're talking about reference points in terms of humanity, it's quite very important. Our reference point is God, outside of ourselves. And when we're talking about reference point, we're talking about something that have moral absolutes. Morality, from the humanistic point of view, is relative. As the first speaker rightly pointed out, how you explain the killing of the Jews? Now, some other school of thought may want to rationalize this. And it's important for you to understand that reference point outside of God does not hold any true validity for three or four possible reasons. The first one is there's no meaning in life.
I'm just going to interrupt you quickly. We don't have a lot of time, but can you please ask the question?
Okay, well, the first question is what I just asked you, which I guess you've already noted that. And the second one is reference points possible outside of God?
Thank you.
So just to address the question about reference points, you're right that when referring to God, we have in mind something supernatural, something that's out of the world. But there are 2 points to raise here. The first one being in what sense is God supernatural and at the same time interacting with the physical world? We have to dare to see whether our world is purely physical and develop a mechanism through which the supernatural can act with the physical. If we accept that the supernatural and the physical are two different entities, then there is a problem of interaction between the supernatural and the physical. In order to avoid this, we can say that there is no purely physical world, but that
the physical world is also included in the supernatural, so it includes some supernatural properties as well. So, in one sense, it's not possible to have God outside of our reference point and also reach God. And the second point I want to raise is that, let's say we imagine God as something external to the physical world, something that's supernatural, something that does not have any physical properties. But the mechanism through which we reach God is always a reference point. And the variety of different religions show that to us. We can imagine if there is a God, there is just one God, and different religions which exist purely in the physical worlds are the reference points through which we examine this external being. So we cannot, when I mention reference points, we also need to see outside the reference point of Christianity, for example. We cannot judge God's existence through only a Christian perspective, but try to see that from the outside.
Thank you. And the first question was about atoms and human evolution to morality and what predates the atoms. Am I correct?
That's a good scientific question. There have been some experiments that have shown how something can come out of nothing. And really the question is not only about whether God can provide this. The question often goes that if science cannot prove this, therefore it must be God. And of course, this is a false dichotomy here. We cannot prove the truth of one thing by showing that the other is false. We must allow science to show its way of how something can indeed come out of nothing, as has been demonstrated. And if we subscribe to the idea of the feast, we will always ask the question, so where did God come from? And having a question setting that God always existed, or God is outside time and outside space, does not help the question, for those attributes of God need to be proven as well. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Sorry, there's a lot of garbage in what was just said. The universe is not eternal in the past. It's finite. There's tremendous evidence for this. The universe began to exist about 13.7 billion years ago. In terms of experiments that show that the universe can come into being from nothing, that's just simply not true. I'd be very happy, in fact, to do a debate at a later point on this topic if you wish. But in terms of where did God come from, yeah, it's perfectly legitimate to say that he's eternal. If the proposition of causality, the proposition of causality only states that things which begin to exist have causes. It doesn't say that things which never began to exist have causes. And every worldview ultimately must come back to an unmoved mover. And I think the best candidate for that unmoved mover is God. God is a necessary being, a being which exists out of necessity of his own nature. That is, he's not contingent. The universe is contingent. We know this because the universe began to exist. Even if the Big Bang wasn't the ultimate starting point of the universe, the evidence from the second law of thermodynamics and a whole range of other evidences point cumulatively to the fact that the universe did in fact have a cosmic beginning. Aristotle, by the way, the Greek philosopher, had a great definition of nothing. What rocks dream about. Right? If you think nothing can come from everything can come from nothing, I'm sorry, but you're completely wrong at this point.
Got one more question, and let me encourage the speakers to understand the decorum, and there's no offense meant when anything has been said. Just to clarify.
It's very debate.
I understand. Your question, and please introduce yourself.
My name is Agatha. My question is to the second speaker. He did say something about, if I have to rephrase or the way I understood what he said, that we're all God. in our own image. We have our conscience, we have our guiding principles, if that was what you said. My only concern is this. We have different faces and we have different ways of judging. We are different gods. So what is the direction? Are we heading to creating a chaotic society where I would define killing as right and he feels it's wrong, and so he comes to attack me because I think it's right to kill, and someone says it's wrong to kill? Where is the guide? Who guides who? And so if we are gods, we do things in our own way, what kind of society are we promoting? What is the end, really?
And your question is to Angela, am I correct? Yeah. Angela, I think you're the star of the show today. Yeah.
So thank you. So again, it's what I said to the previous people who asked the question. We must judge what is best when we try to set up a society. So let's say we start from point zero and try to set up a new community, a new society. Now, which rules do we need to follow? Do we need someone over and above our consciousness to dictate which rules we must follow? I would say no. We don't need, when we form a new community, to tell us, someone to tell us that it's wrong to kill others. And of course, it will never be right to have a law that says that it's wrong to kill. And again, I would like to stress the fact out that I am particularly concerned if what keeps us all from murdering each other is the idea of God, and this is not something innate about us, but something that we only believe at just because the Bible says so, or because God told us so. This is nothing that came out of God or the Bible or any text. It's something that we have innate in us, and we must be proud, I would say, that we have this feeling in us that it's wrong to kill. And it can also be seen in evolutionary moral terms. If it was at any point, if we were some species that were fine with killing each other, we wouldn't reach the point we reach now. And again, the third point I want to state is about moral values and the existence of God. One does not provide the other.
Thank you very much. There will be time for more questions after we have our next set of speakers speak. So if you do have questions, can you please note them down? I would have a longer session for questions and answers. I can tell this is a very interesting conversation that we're having, and I myself am learning a lot, and I hope you all out there are also learning and having thoughts through your mind. But I want to state this and clearly state this. In all, we should all treat each other with respect and with care and with love, and irrespective of our point of views and what we think or how hard we feel in our hearts right now, let us continue to engage and continue to realize that we're having a conversation to better each other's life. A round of applause for our speakers, please. So, Nick is coming on stage for the second affirmation speech.
Thank you everyone, it's good to be here. I wonder if anyone here watches the TV show Antiques Roadshow. Members of the public bring along an object they've had in their family and they ask experts for an appraisal. And the experts tell them the purpose of the object, what it's for, the meaning of the object. For example, it was made to commemorate Victoria's Jubilee, and the value of the object, what it would get at an auction. Now, I'm not really interested in antiques, but I do like the part about the value, especially when a surprise comes up. And in 2013, during a road show in Cirencester, Fiona Bruce spotted a painting that she thought was a genuine Van Dyck. The painting had been bought for only £400 from an antique shop by this priest, and it was valued at £400,000. Which probably explains the width of that young man's smile, which I think is possibly a bit inappropriate for a priest who's meant to have eschewed materialism. But these questions of meaning and purpose and value are crucial if we want to live well. As a lecturer, my privilege is to mentor young people and in thinking about their careers and to write references for them. And when I speak to students, and I ask them what they want to do, they talk about meaning and purpose and value more than they talk about money. So these things are important. And I want to make three arguments tonight. And the first argument I want to make is that without God, we can make no argument that men and women have inherent value and therefore deserve dignified treatment. Now, I was remembering the last time I was in this building. It was in April for a service to mark 50 years since Martin Luther King was murdered. A year ago, Newcastle University put up this statue of Martin Luther King. It's worth looking at, it's just over there. And it was to mark 50 years since Newcastle gave him an honorary degree. And he came to Newcastle, and this was the only city in the country to give him an honorary degree. And the preacher at the service this year, the commemoration service, was a man called Jeffrey Brown. He is the pastor of a church in Boston, which was Martin Luther King's previous church. And Jeffrey Brown was the architect of the so-called Boston Miracle. In the 1990s, it was a violence reduction program in the city of Boston that saw youth crime fall by 80%. And Jeffrey Brown's life, in fact, is the topic of a forthcoming Hollywood movie. Now, the core idea in King's life, the core concept behind his work, was that human beings are made in the image of God. This was the key argument that Christian opponents of slavery used, and it was the key argument that people like King used in the civil rights movement and the objections to racism and segregation in the US. Because people are made in God's image, they are inherently valuable and cannot be treated as mere things or possessions. It was the reason that King opposed racism, it was the reason that King opposed poverty, and it was the reason that he opposed war. And Jeffrey Brown is given the best years of his life to work with marginalised and excluded and feared young black communities because he believes their lives are inherently valuable and worth saving. Yet if atheism is correct and pushed to its logical conclusions, then these men are deluded. Human beings are not sacred. They are not made in God's image. They have no inherent value. They are merely an accident of time and chance and evolution. A collection of atoms that has no more inherent value than Jonathan's slugs or Jonathan's socks, even. It's a waste of time putting up statues like those to Martin Luther King, because the belief on which he based his life was a delusion that should be ditched. Of course, most atheists don't ditch it. They try and smuggle it in by the back door, talking about inalienable rights, or pepper their speech with words like we ought to or we should treat people in a certain way, as though it's common sense. But they're being inconsistent when they do it. However, there are some atheists who have been consistent in this regard, and they can be seen most clearly in atheist political regimes. There have been very few of them in history. They can probably be numbered on the fingers of two hands, but they've been particularly murderous. Because in these countries, most of which have been communist, they see religion as a project invented by elites to keep the poor under control. So humans aren't made in God's image. They are simply the raw materials for building the great projects of state socialism. And if they get in the way of it, by daring to question it or by becoming useless towards it, then there is no moral reason not to eliminate them. For example, last week, you might have seen the news that courts in Cambodia found these two men, Nguyen Chi, aged 92, and Kyo Sam Phan, aged 87, guilty of genocide. They were leading figures in the Khmer Rouge regime that in 4 short years in the 1970s killed 2 million people. 2 million people it regarded as being without value for their project. So, if there is no God, then human life can have no intrinsic value, with terrible consequences for the real world. The second argument I want to make is not that God is necessary for life to have meaning, Jonathan's argued that, but that rather a world in which the search for meaning is near universal is itself a clue to the existence of God. And here I want to explain the reason why I was persuaded that belief in God is more reasonable and more rational than non-belief. In the mid-1990s, after finishing my degree at Durham University and before starting my PhD at Cambridge, I had an existential crisis. I was asking these questions: what's the point of life? How do we know reality is there? What should I do with the rest of my life? And during those 3 years, I spent time in different communities in the UK and in Asia. And I was struck that all of these communities, people were busy finding meaning for their lives. The farming community I lived with for 6 months in Kyrgyzstan were finding it through the rituals of Islamic practice and family life. The academics at Durham and Cambridge were finding it by writing things that most people weren't interested in, but by sitting in seminars and talking about them, they were finding their meaning and value affirmed. The activists I was hanging out with in London were finding meaning by standing outside arms fair sales and protesting and feeling they were making a difference, making the world a better place. The longing for meaning is everywhere. Now, what's the significance of this? The great atheist thinker Sigmund Freud said, at that moment when a person starts to seriously ponder the meaning and value of life, you can consider him a madman. So by his definition, we're all mad here this evening. But Freud was that rare creature, a consistent atheist. He is almost alone in this. Most people, even atheists, can't avoid the nagging questions about purpose and meaning and the value of what they're doing. And I started to think this: if only a few people in history had ever wondered about the meaning of life, maybe religious people in a church or philosophers in a university, then maybe Freud would be right. But what struck me in this period was the sheer near universality of the search for meaning. We're not satisfied with just eating and drinking and finding shelter and having sex and procreating. We yearn for something more, for meaning. Why is that? Now, I came to conclude that the most rational explanation of this anthropological evidence for the search for meaning was that search for meaning is a product of the way we are made. We are made pointing towards meaning. As the Bible says, God has made us with eternity in our hearts. And I think that's a clue to the existence of God. But the final argument I want to make is about competing meanings. The profusion of meanings that I observed and that we've been thinking about tonight, I think point us to God, but they leave us with the question, how do we judge between these meanings? And both Angelos and Jonathan were wrestling with this. So take two very different interpretations of the meaning of life. First by Michael Shermer. He is founder of The Skeptic magazine and an atheist. He said this, when asked about the meaning of life. He said, play hard, work hard, love hard. The bottom line for me is to live life to the fullest in the here and now, instead of a hoped-for hereafter, and make every day count in some meaningful way, and to do something, no matter how small it is, to make the world a better place. And consider this approach recorded by the chroniclers of Genghis Khan, who was one of the most successful political leaders in history, who built the world's largest empire. As a geographer, I can't give a talk without throwing in a map somewhere. He asked his generals what life was about, and they gave him an answer, and he said, no, you're wrong. If Genghis Khan says you're wrong, you'll probably shut up after that. He said, the greatest enjoyment of a man is to overcome his enemies, to drive them from before him, to snatch what they have, to see the people whom they are dear to with their faces bathed in tears, to ride their horses, and to squeeze in his arms their wives and daughters. For Shermer, the meaning of life is to work hard, play hard, and love hard, and this means make the world a better place and find meaning in it. For Genghis, It is literally to pillage and murder and rape. How do you judge between them? For if the universe is essentially meaningless, if there is no God we can appeal up to, then there is no way of telling which is the true meaning. All we can do is either smuggle in values by the back door and say, well, of course we shouldn't hurt people, of course it's wrong to murder, or we can fight it out on Twitter, or fight it out face to face. And in a two-way contest here, my money would be on Genghis Khan, I think. And in summing up, I want to show you one of the most famous pictures which has ever been painted. You'll recognise it. It's Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam. An important statement of the Renaissance, that humans were made in God's image, endowed with inestimable value, with a noble purpose, and with inherent meaning. The atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell said this. He said, "There is darkness without, and when I die, there will be darkness within. There is no splendour, there is no vastness anywhere, only triviality for a moment, and then nothing." In contrast, St. John, the writer of the first Gospel, declares of Jesus, "In him was light, and that light was the life of humankind." In a consistent atheist worldview, it is absurd to talk about meaning, for there is none. Against this, I would argue that without God, there can be no intrinsic value or inalienable dignity to humans. That a universe teeming with meaning is a clue pointing us towards the existence of God, who made us. And without God, there is no way to judge between meanings. God is necessary for finding meaning and value and purpose.
Thank you very, very, very much. All right, so we'll have Mike on stage for a review tour. And that will be 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Just going off script to start with, I'd like to say that I am here representing humanists, not atheists. Atheists, as Vic's pointed out, have been responsible for some mass killing, genocide in the past, as have Christians. Humanists have never been responsible for any mass killings. But I'm speaking against this motion, that belief in God is necessary for people to find meaning, value and purpose.
Excuse me, Mike. Could you just move the mic closer to you?
The mic person.
Yeah. Can't hear.
Move closer to the mic. Is that better? Yeah. So, contrary to what Jonathan wanted, I'm not talking about cosmic meaning, I'm talking about meaning in the world, more pragmatic. Point number one, the first single-celled living beings, our common universal ancestor, lived about 2 billion years ago. From this source has evolved all life on Earth. Many have gone extinct, but estimates suggest 30 million plants and animal species are around today. Their only purpose in life is to survive and to pass on their genes to the next generation. The animal species, called Homo sapiens, has only been around for less than 100,000 years, but uniquely has developed self-awareness, language, and a mind capable of rational thought, the ability to think about the past and the future and about the meaning of life. As you will be aware, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was published nearly 160 years ago and has been validated so often that it is as close to scientific fact as you can get, and is now accepted by most Christians as being compatible with their faith. If survival of the fittest only applied to individuals and selfish genes, one could argue that evolution could lead to some selfish behaviour which would not be good for society. But evolution also applies to groups. Anyone who watches nature programs will have seen the social behaviour of groups of animals, such as meerkats and monkeys and lions, and the practice of kin altruism, reciprocal altruism, and the benefits of teamwork in capturing prey. These are inherited behaviours which allow the group to survive and thrive. In the case of humankind, these inherited behaviours or social rules have evolved and become known as morals, and they continue to evolve, shaped increasingly by our rational brains. Point number 2. Historically, some of the earliest written records of man thinking about the meaning of life and rules of behaviour occurred about 600 to 500 years BCE. It is apparent from these writings and archaeological evidence that there was always a general belief in gods. There was already a general belief. This was not surprising as man sought to explain the reasons behind natural disasters and phenomena. In Greece, people started questioning the existence of these gods and were formulating theories to try to explain the way the world worked. Also, coincidentally and independently, in 3 areas of the world, Greece, India and China, rules of behaviour for society were being written down. Moral codes, written by Plato, the Buddha and Confucius, all without reference to any god. They all included what became known as the Golden Rule. Do not do to other people what you would not want done to you. Socrates asked the question, how should we live? What sort of people should we be? And the answer that he gave was not specific to any one person or any one way of life. It was a very general answer. He said, the kind of life truly worth living is the life thought about, the considered life, the chosen life. Unfortunately, a lot of the Greek enlightened thinking was lost to the Western world due to the rise of Christianity and the dogmas and conflict associated with it. And it was not until the 14th century CE that things started to change. The Renaissance, the Reformation, more worldwide travel, the development of the scientific method, and the rediscovery of the Greek thoughts led to the 18th century Enlightenment. According to Immanuel Kant, enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. The immaturity referred to as man's inability, due to lack of courage and resolve, to use his own brain to make decisions without reference to external guidance. He said the motto of enlightenment should be, dare to know. Since then we have seen an explosion of knowledge, and we now understand much of how the universe and people work. We no longer need to invoke the supernatural for explanations. Science and technology have transformed all of our lives and given us a lot more time to think about and enjoy the good life. Point 3 is interesting because it's a quote partially already given. It's to quote Michael Shermer again, the most basic purpose in life is survival and reproduction. But we humans have the innate capability of creating meaning for ourselves if we choose to do so. Our lives become meaningful by valuing things in the here and now. I believe that the meaning of life and the value and purpose of life is different for every individual, because each person inherits different genes, grows up in a different environment, develops different skills, and makes his or her own decisions about what path to take through the opportunities of life. Many humans find purpose and meaning in working for a cause that they believe in. They become activists, perhaps building a larger community of people who believe similar things, perhaps campaigning to reduce animal suffering, or improving the climate, or making the world a fairer place, or fighting for human rights. Point number 4, we humanists also believe that we have to make the most of this life because it is the only one that we know positively exists. We think that the best way to do that is to strive to be happy and to try to make other people happy. So we all need to understand what makes people happy, and I think some essential ingredients are as follows: having enough warmth, shelter and food, as in Maslow's hierarchy of need; having people to love and who will love us in return; having personal goals that are challenging but achievable; living in a supportive community of friends and colleagues; keeping a healthy mind and a healthy body; making full and productive use of our personal talents or skills; using our creativity to make things and enjoying the creativity of others, for example in art, architecture and music; being kind to humans and animals; and being authentic or true to oneself. The list can go on, but note there is no mention of hedonistic pleasures, but we should allow ourselves most things in moderation, as long as we do no harm to others. In addition, happiness refers not only to the psychological state of feeling happy, it can describe a wider, fuller sense of well-being brought about by living a full and flourishing life. It refers to its quality as a whole, to how rich and rewarding it is, or perhaps to how well we fulfill our potential. The Greek word eudaimonia refers to this quality. Bertrand Russell, quoting again, in his 1930 book, The Conquest of Happiness, put it as follows: "The secret of happiness is this: let your interests be as wide as possible, and let your reactions to the things and persons that interest you be, as far as possible, friendly rather than hostile. Passions and interests should be directed outwards, not inwards. Those passions that shut us up inside ourselves are fear, envy, the sense of sin, self-pity and self-admiration." Oscar Wilde said, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist, that is all." And I think this is still true for a lot of people. They fail to appreciate how lucky they are to be alive and to have a brain containing innate social instincts and capable of rational thought. We should learn as much as we can, think for ourselves, make our own minds up about things based on the evidence, but also follow our instincts. An individual's life is so fleeting that it is a terrible waste if we don't grasp every opportunity that comes along. Live life to the full. Point number 5. Humanists are spiritual people. This spirituality is about self-awareness, being reflective about our actions and beliefs and other people's beliefs, deep thinking about the world and its problems and how we can contribute to make it a better world. We have a sense of awe about the universe, art, music and nature. The more one thinks, reads and watches films and TV programs about the world, the more one identifies with an ever-enlarging community. We are all part of something bigger than ourselves, from family to local community to country, continent and the world, including the animals, plants and environment. The Dalai Lama said, "Whether a person practices religion or not, the spiritual qualities of love, compassion, acceptance and tolerance, patience, forgiveness and humility are indispensable. We cannot do without these basic spiritual qualities, whose unifying characteristic is concern for others' well-being, acknowledging human diversity and respecting of rights for all." Unquote. Point 6 is about me. I have never believed in a God, but I think I've led and am leading an enjoyable and purposeful life, a good life. I have fathered 2 children, now healthy adults, and maintained a loving relationship with my wife for nearly 50 years. At work, I helped to develop a new man-made fibre from small-scale trials to full factory production. In retirement, I do volunteering work, not just the North East Humanists, but I have worked in St Oswald's Hospice, led older people on long health walks in the countryside, and acted as a befriender to the socially isolated. I contribute a percentage of my income to charities around the world. I'm not claiming to be in any way special in all of this. It's not about being a humanist, it's about being human. I have great admiration for people in religious communities who do some wonderful charitable work, both in this country and abroad. I suggest that what drives most Christians to do good things is not their belief in God, but the fact that they are educated humans who share the innate moral code that all humans have. The vast majority of people do not look to their holy books before deciding on a course of action. They know instinctively what is right and wrong, thanks to their shared evolution. To summarise, our morality, our sense of right and wrong, comes from our evolution, both biological and cultural, from us being social animals who have learned to live and thrive in large communities. From the universal or objective perspective, the meaning or purpose of life is just to stay alive, reproduce and keep life going. Without this, there is no life. From the social or interpersonal perspective, meaning emerges from engagement with positive or worthwhile relationships, goals and actions. Love of family, people, ideals, knowledge, creativity, helping others inspires such engagement. Without this, there is no progress. From the subjective or personal perspective, the experience of inner peace, self-awareness, beauty, joy and happiness give life meaning. The belief in God is not an essential part of having meaning, value and purpose in life. Thank you.
So we've had lots of things being said here today, and it's challenged us because it's in our nature for us to want to think and reason. I'll try as possible to stay as neutral as possible and have everyone in the audience ask the questions. We'll start with you. Can you please introduce yourself and ask your question?
Well, I'm John from Sunderland, and I used to be a Christian till 1975, but now I'm not a Christian, and I think quite freely. I just make up my own mind on different subjects. But I often dip into the Bible, and I think, well, some of the speakers are saying there is a God. Well, if there is a God, why did your God write such a horrible book? For example, your God had Abraham, was about 95-year-old, and had him wanted him to be circumcised. And Abraham had all his servants circumcised. I think, how could your God have such a horrible idea in his mind? And then another time, God said to Abraham, I'm putting you to the test. Have your son Isaac, I want you to kill your son in sacrifice. And Abraham was getting out this dagger and going to stab the son Isaac. And then God, this your loving God, sends an angel and says, oh no, don't go ahead with it. What a lovely person I am. And I think if anybody should be brought up for child abuse, it should be God. I think that was a very cruel thing to do. And there are lots of examples of God's cruelty. God had somebody stoned to death for picking up sticks on a Saturday. That's just one example. And then if you ask Christians about this, they say, oh, but God has changed. God is a much nicer person since Jesus came on the scene. And then I say, oh, then I was reading St. Matthew's Gospel a week ago, and Jesus said, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Well, these are ridiculous ideas.
Thank you so much. Can I have Nick? You want to take that one?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I think some of the passages you're referring to are metaphorical. So when Jesus says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Let me give you an example. One of my friends became completely addicted to computer games years and years ago. And to the extent that he was not being able to relate to his friends, he wasn't doing his job properly. So he decided to completely stop playing computer games because it was wrecking his life. There's nothing inherently wrong with computer games, so I would see that as metaphorical. Now, in terms of some of the other texts you were talking about, we haven't got time to talk about all of them. A book I published last year was called Warlike Christians in an Age of Violence, and it was looking at critique of, as Mike mentioned, the violence that the church has perpetrated on the world in the name of Christianity. Now, one of the arguments I looked at was that God allowed war in the Old Testament. You've mentioned some of the examples of violence, but not in the New Testament. And Christians, sometimes people say, well, God has gotten nicer. I think the argument that I would make in that book was that war had the rules in the Old Testament had a specific purpose and meaning about limiting violence and limiting damage and creating social rules for a certain period until Jesus Christ came, when the Holy Spirit was poured out, and the God's community and God's people now is not a territorial nation state as in the Old Testament. It is the church which teaches love your enemies and do good to those who bless you. So I think it's important to understand the reason for certain rules and laws at certain times.
Thank you so much, Nick. Just as a follow-up, when Angelo was talking about the way we view God, actually the question is for you, Nick. Is he right in saying we shouldn't look at God from a one point of view, the Christian point of view, and you should have an alternate point of view, review exactly how God is being used? So, Angelo, you remember during your speech, you want to...
Yes, so that was, I believe, the question about the reference point we use in our lives.
Yeah.
So, someone mentioned that we cannot put God outside of the reference point, because I argue that in any argument we make, not just in theology but in philosophy as well, we cannot use a reference point that is included in our argument. Especially if we're talking about an objective truth, we should be able to see an objective truth from the outside. So the point was that in order to say that through God we can reach objective truths, we should not only see through the lenses of Christianity, and not through other religions as well, but outside the lenses of Christianity.
So I think my question would be, is he right in saying Christians should not just be the judge of who God is, but also have other people help review the conversation around who God is? Nick, Jonathan.
I'm still not quite sure if I understand the question, but is it to do with how one religion is objectively true as opposed to any other, or is that kind of where you're getting at?
So, so you can think of it as, let's say, a theory in science and a theory in theology. A theory in theology is, let me start with a theory in science. A theory in science about gravity, for example. If we had 100 different theories of gravity, then this would undermine science as a discipline. And the fact that there are so many religions around undermines the religion as being the way we can find what religions claim to be true.
In science, there are lots of different theories of lots of fields. Evolutionary biology, which is my own academic discipline, has a huge amount of controversies on all kinds of things. I was at the Royal Society meeting just a couple of years ago in London, and they were calling for an extended new synthesis of evolution. So there's certainly a lot of controversy and debate about scientific theories. There's different theories of quantum mechanics. There's all kinds of pick your scientific theory. There's lots of different viewpoints and perspectives. So I don't think the analogy is a very good one. But in terms of theology, I don't see why it should undermine it. I think that Christianity uniquely is an evidence-based faith. It's based on public evidence which we can go and investigate for ourselves. Whereas other religions such as Islam, Hinduism, what have you, are not evidence-based faiths, I would argue.
Thank you. So can we get the audience?
Thank you. I'm Moira, a member of North East Humanists. A question for Jonathan. You said there was plenty of evidence in the New Testament for A, the existence of God, and B, for the bodily resurrection of Jesus. First, I would like to know when exactly the New Testament was written, because I understood it was written down about 300 years after the death of Christ. Maybe I'm wrong, but you can correct me on that. And secondly, what is the evidence for the bodily resurrection of Jesus?
Thank you, Laura.
Let me just ask before I start, how long do I have? Because I could literally talk for hours on this.
You've got 1 minute and 30 seconds. And I'm timing that, just to be sure.
Let's take 2 minutes, right? 2 minutes.
1, and you're on. Go.
Okay. As for when the New Testament was written, no, you're completely wrong. It wasn't written 300 years after Jesus died. There's 27 different books in the New Testament, and there's different letters by different individuals. Like Paul, for example, wrote 13 letters that we find in the New Testament. To take one example, 1 Corinthians is written about AD 55. Jesus died around 33 AD. The Synoptic Gospels, I would argue that that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are all pre-70. That's my dating. I would actually argue the Synoptics are likely to be pre-60 AD. John's Gospel is usually dated to around 90 or 95 AD. I tend to think it's earlier. So there's a minority of scholars, such as Daniel Wallace, who dated to the 50s, and I think with some good reasons, in fact. In terms of the bodily resurrection of Jesus, I think that there's tremendous evidence that the Gospels are in fact based on eyewitness testimony. And there's tremendous evidence. Let's just take one example of many that can be given. Let's take an external corroboration of something in Scripture. Take, for example, in Matthew chapter 2, where you have Joseph returning from Egypt, and he hears that Archelaus is reigning in place of his father Herod, so he goes by a different route. The question arises, why is Joseph, father of Jesus, afraid of Archelaus? He's mentioned nowhere else in the Bible. The answer is found in Flavius Josephus, who tells us that one of the last things that Herod the Great did before his death was to have certain Jews executed for their part in stoning to death certain Roman soldiers over an argument that arose during the time of Passover. Archelaus, because of this threat upon his government, rounded up his entire army and sent his army upon the Jewish temple, surrounded the temple with cavalry, and told them, do not let anyone leave or enter the temple. He sent the infantry into the temple and massacred 3,000 Jews, and then announced Passover's cancelled, return to your homes. And so you can imagine Joseph coming back from Egypt, encountering this massive fleeing pilgrims coming out of Judea, hearing what just happened and deciding to go by a different route. There's tons of those examples where external secular sources corroborate or illuminate parts of the Bible, and because the Gospels can be shown to be predicated on eyewitness testimony, reliably grounded in that apostolic testimony, we have to take seriously the nature of the claimed resurrection experiences, involving not just sight, but group conversations, physical touch, extended across 40 days, even according to John's Gospel, ate breakfast with Jesus after his death. And so that is what needs to be explained. And the fact that the disciples were willing to die as martyrs for that belief also, I think, attests to its veracity. James is one example. James was a skeptic of Jesus during his lifetime. I won't attempt to get to the evidence for that, but I like to ask the skeptic.
Jonathan, I'm going to have to stop you there.
Okay, thank you.
You have to spend more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
I'll have the lady over there ask a question. The young lady over there.
I'd like to ask.
What is your name?
Isa.
Isa, nice to meet you, Isa. What's your question?
I'd like to ask if God isn't real, then why are there so many churches around the world?
Why is there so many churches? Did anyone hear our question? Why is there so many churches if God is real? Why isn't there so many churches?
Why is there so many churches around the world?
Why is there so many churches around the world?
If God isn't real.
If God isn't real. That is a good question for Mike. You want to take that one?
Hello. Yeah, as I mentioned in my script, it is inherent in the evolving man's person, evolving humankind's brain, that they, as Jonathan mentioned, there's something inherent about questioning why are we here? You know, why is the lightning coming down in the sky? Why has my child died? So people are asking questions all the time, and 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, when they asked those questions, there wasn't science. I mean, how could they explain it? And the only way that you can rationally explain it 3,000, 4,000 years ago was by something outside the world that was causing all of these things to happen. And all over the world, people started believing in the supernatural to explain what was going on. So, yes, different religions started up, and every one of those religions has started, almost as soon as they've been formed, they started splitting up into different beliefs. Just Protestantism, as far as I know, has got 2,000 denominations, approximately, in the world. These are 2,000 different belief things, all based on Christianity, but all believing different things with different problems. So every religion is like that. It just splits as soon as it is formed. But as I said, nowadays we don't need to believe in the supernatural in order to explain where lightning comes from and why people die, why there's disease, etc.
Go on.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. And I think I'd like to say two things. You could simply say not why are there so many churches, but why are there so many mosques and why are there so many temples, etc. And to my mind, if only a few cultures or civilizations in history had discovered the idea of God, we might be able to say it's just some attempt to explain that these particular cultures have found a way to do it. But the near universality of a sense that there's more to life than what we can see and touch, to my mind, suggests maybe there is more to God, maybe there is an idea of God. But the second thing I'd like to say is actually, just to engage what Mike was saying, Mike suggested that as our scientific knowledge has developed, our need for religion has become less so. I would challenge that. My PhD was done at Cambridge, and the Cavendish laboratories in Cambridge, which is where the structure of the atom was first identified, one of the first modern laboratories, has written above it in the words, Latin, the words from the book of Psalms, how many are the works of the Lord, they are studied by all who delight in them. And the modern scientific project, as understood in Europe, came from a Christian worldview that God has made a rational world that we can understand, and it's good for us to study it. One of the greatest scientific advances in my lifetime has been the coding of the human genome. And when this the map of the genome was unveiled and announced at the White House, I believe it was when Clinton was president, there was a big ceremony beamed around the world. And Francis Collins, who was the scientist in charge of that, spoke. And Bill Clinton said, "This is God's guidebook of how we are made." And Francis Collins, the scientist, said, "Yes, I believe this too." He was an atheist who became a Christian due to his study and his experiences. And he said, in studying the human genome, we uncoded God's instruction book for life. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than saying that science has replaced religion. in many cultures you see it as science and progress have developed, so has religion too.
So is it safe to say that as humans we are on a journey of life?
Who could possibly disagree with that statement?
Angela, what do you think? Is it safe to say we as humans are on a journey of life?
Yeah, it seems that we have an innate. Our initial thoughts when we come to the world is to value life for what it is and to find answers to those questions that physically bother us, and they come to us naturally, and we try to find answers to those questions through different paths. One of them could be theology or the other science, but we can see differences between the two different paths.
Yes, please.
Just further to that, I mean, we are on an ongoing journey insofar as we're still evolving. Our morality will continue to evolve. But just in answer to, or further to Nick's question, Nick's statement, I wasn't suggesting that science can replace religion. What I was saying was that in terms of explaining the phenomena that happen in the world, we now have scientific explanations for those phenomena rather than having to rely on a supernatural explanation. But I don't think science will replace religion.
Could I just say something back to that? I think that often in the past, when humans haven't understood things, they have resorted to God as the explanation. But I think that's a position that many Christians would find objectionable. So Galileo, of course, who was a great scientist, a great Christian, was debating this, and he said that the Holy Scriptures are there to tell us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go, and which I think is quite amusing. And that sometimes Christians, because they haven't understood things, they've used God as the explanation, when God has given us brains, God has given us science, God has given us the capacity to understand, and wants us to do that. So I think Christians need to put their hand up and say, yeah, sometimes we've provided crazy explanations, which was certainly not, I don't think, what God's intention was in the Bible.
I actually disagree with Mike here. I think that over time the evidence for design has gotten stronger and stronger in the natural sciences, both in the physical sciences and in the life sciences. In the physical sciences, I think that the evidence for the fine-tuning of the universe has mounted rather than diminished over the years. And also I think in the biological sciences, which is my own field of expertise, I think the evidence has gotten much stronger now that we know about the information systems and the information storage, processing and retrieval apparatus and the molecular nanotechnology that governs the cell, and just how much just the sheer level of complexity required for even the simplest cell and the molecular machinery that's involved in so many of the cell's processes. So I think that the evidence is really mounted in both the physical and life sciences on that.
Thank you. We'll go back to questioning from the audience. Well, what I can see clearly is there is a value of purpose, and I think everyone across the room actually borders that conversation in a way. Questions? Oh, go on.
Hi.
What's your name, please?
I'm Pablo. I study physics, or as I like to call it, numerical theology. It seems, and as we've seen tonight, it's very easy to make a common sense argument for atheist humanism. To say, well, of course you shouldn't murder, well, of course you shouldn't commit genocide, well, of course you shouldn't steal, well, of course you should be honest. It's pragmatic, it's utilitarian. And I don't think anybody is denying this. My first problem with this is that to date I have not heard an argument for atheist humanism that necessitates not doing those things, that provides a barrier against cold-blooded murder, that provides some logical conclusion that says there is no circumstance in which cold-blooded murder is acceptable. Because once you have an agreed set of values, there is only a matter of logic to determine what the best course of action is. But without a transcendent idea of good, without a transcendent idea of the divine, and without taking life to be more than the material, I struggle to see a way in which you can construct a value hierarchy where you can say this value is definitely more worthwhile than this other value. And if you can't achieve that, then how is it that you can achieve the point where you say cold-blooded murder is never okay?
Angela?
So this question was asked before, and I mentioned that it is indeed very difficult to find an objective way of defining why murder is wrong, for example. And I don't think that the theist can provide an answer to that question. A God cannot provide an objective moral truth, and even if God creates the world with some moral truths in mind, it doesn't logically follow that. There's a big gap there between a God which believes some things to be true or not, and the creations following those moral truths. And I don't believe that I have the question, but I don't think that I have the answer, but I don't believe that anyone has the answer to that question. Is it currently impossible through any scientific, philosophical, or theological terms to find a convincing answer of why murder is wrong? But I do not believe at the same time that the theist, merely by saying that God does not want murder to take place, that murder is wrong. But this does not, the fact that we cannot find a definite answer to that question does not mean that we all, without God or without guidance, some supernatural guidance, we would end up in an immoral world. We can at least say that not murdering is more useful than murdering. Or if we would build up a society, then we would say, okay, do we have a law which prohibits murder or which allows murder? Of course, a law which prohibits murder is favorable, especially if we think of a developing society in evolutionary terms. We can think of it in terms of utility or usefulness, and we can also think of it in terms of pleasure and harm. Which actions of ours cause more pleasure and which actions of ours cause more harm? And this is not to take a subjectivist approach. You might see some people in particularly Islamist countries that they kill people for the crime of blasphemy. And they believe that they are doing this that they provide more pleasure to their community through this. But if we try to see this from an objectivist perspective, and that's why I stress that we need to have an outsider's view of a particular moral truth, we can see that their actions are inherently wrong, and it doesn't make sense to kill someone for accusing someone of blasphemy and killing them. And we are not saying this through our subjectivist approach, but we are convinced that it is in a way more objective than theirs, and it's not that we equalize in this way all subjectivist approaches to morality.
So a more embellished version of that question, I'll probably ask that to you, Jonathan, would be the case of laws, because that's where this is actually leading to. How do we define what is law based on the human point of view? Because there is the law of God that Christians have to follow. And Angela here is explaining that the law should come from the general norm of what happens based on the coexistence of a certain group of people on an individualistic point of view. So in terms of our natural law, as man, the law that governs the country, the law that governs Newcastle, how do we develop that?
I think just simply the fact that something is moral and immoral doesn't necessarily mean it should be legislated in law. So, for example,
as a Christian, I think fornication or sex outside of marriage is morally wrong, and I don't think it should be illegal, right, in that sense. So there's certain things which I think are morally wrong because of my Christian convictions, but and I don't necessarily think it should be enshrined in law. I mean, I think in terms of what should be lawful, I think that which benefits society and leads to the health and well-being of society.
So society decides what becomes law.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's divorced from moral principles, but I don't. So yeah. I don't think it's divorced from moral principles, and I think that moral principles inform. There are certain moral principles which inform, what becomes law.
Okay, Mike, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see Jonathan agreeing with our point of view in that respect. But going back to the question, if you look at the animal kingdom, let's say groups of monkeys, apes, where you've got a small group one side and another small group the other side, I think the rules of survival said at that stage, you must not kill animals within your group or the monkeys within your group, but you're perfectly okay killing monkeys in the other group because they were competing. And so it's the survival of this is group evolution, the best group survived, the one with the best rules. So, and then you've got to imagine that evolution involving the group getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're now talking about, cities and of people, and the rules are there, and the best rules are made into laws. The other rules have just become part of accepted behaviour. This variable morality which changes with every couple of decades, due to our evolving brains. So we've all got this basic innate morality which is our inner self, but we have evolved this brain which is creative and rational and has started to think about what our bodies and what our innate senses are telling us. We can actually start rationalising that now, and as time goes on, the rational brain will change the morality. This is why homosexuality has been changed from being criminal to being accepted. This is why slavery has stopped being the norm, because we've rationalised that it is far better for society as a whole to change in that respect.
Thank you, Mike. Question from the audience. I will ask him for a question. I'll come back to you after. What's your name, please? Max.
I'm just wondering, when you make the meaning and purpose of life entirely subjective in that it's self-created, how can you go about condemning another person for simply acting in their own purpose?
That's a good question, actually. Who wants to take it from a panelist?
Well, we again go back on how we necessitate which moral truths are objectively true or not. And we again can offer the same answer. The fact that we judge what is true or not, or good or bad in our society, not based on what some book says or what God says, because as we've seen, the Bible, for example, or all holy texts, include many actions which, if done today, they would lead to some bad consequences for society. So, when deciding whether to do a good or bad action, we always think of how this will affect others. And you can always ask the question, so why should I respect others? And I will reply, because others have an innate self-value. And you will reply, how do you know that others have innate self-value? Because we always ought to respect other human beings for what they are. And this goes, it's an infinite regress which does not have the final
answer that we're looking for that's going to necessitate, that's going to make it absolutely right or absolutely wrong to perform a certain action.
Does that answer the question, Max?
Yes, I mean, to the extent that you're actually kind of just saying, I mean, what I'm saying is it can you meaningfully condemn them to the extent that it's not just condemnation because it's anti the progression of society? I mean, is morality simply born out of what is useful to society's existence?
It's something if we all start with the premise that each one of us wants to have more pleasure than harm in their lives, then each one of us wants to progress as a human being, then we ought to respect each other for this wish of each other human being. We can start with the assumption that we all want more pleasure than harm in our lives. So respecting other human beings means that we should always strive to satisfy this wish of others, to provide them with more pleasure than harm. And this, of course, does not, of course, anyone can, at any time, can harm others. And then we go back to the question of what is useful and what is progressive for society. We start with some axioms, with some arguments that we readily accept without questioning them. That is the innate value of each human being and the fact that we should always strive to provide more pleasure than harm. And we do not question this in order to have a modern society. We just start with these assumptions. But when you start to question this, then as the theists do, then we can see that it's very difficult to find a necessary and absolute answer of why we should always respect others and why should we always look to provide more pleasure than harm.
Thank you. So, Nick, do you want to...
I think the answer to your question is very simple. If you don't believe that humans are made in God's image and have an innate value, then you can't judge anyone for their actions. And I think that's what Angelos, in his very, very honest reflections there, is essentially admitting. There used to be, some Christians used to have this wristband, and in the 1990s, with the letters WWJD on. What would Jesus do? My question would be WWGD. What would Genghis do? What would Genghis do? Because Angelos said, we need to start with the assumption that we should give maximum pleasure to everyone. Well, who says that? If we're not positing a God. Angelos says it. Well, what if Genghis comes and cuts off Angelos' head? For Genghis, pleasure, the maximum pleasure, was derived from killing his enemies, through seizing their lands, through raping their daughters and women, and riding off on their horses. If you are unable to say there is something objectively wrong by that, because those people are created in God's image and have an infinite value to Him, then you are in real difficulty. In an environment like this, where we have shared cultural values, where you could say we believe in the innate goodness of humans, it probably doesn't matter. But in contexts around the world where I've worked, and some of my research on post-conflict, post-genocide situations, it matters enormously. And a worldview which cannot say objectively these actions were wrong because that person is made in God's image is a worldview which frankly has little relevance and value outside of a safe post-Christian environment like ours.
So where would you say intrinsic moral value originates from?
It comes from the fact that we are made by God. We look like Him in that we have infinite value in His regard. So there's an unfortunate man some of you might have heard of called Otto Benga. Otto Benga was what's known as a pygmy. He was from the Cameroon, and he was brought to New York in the early 1900s, and he was put in the Bronx Zoo alongside the animals. And he was studied. At this stage, there was a form of scientific racism that was looking at the size of people's brains, and it argued that Africans had evolved in an inferior way to Europeans. And therefore it was appropriate to keep this person in the zoo because he was not a full human being. There were the theologians at that time, particularly from the Black Baptist tradition, argued that this is obnoxious because this is a being made in God's image. The scientific community couldn't make that argument because they had no basis for that. If you don't have the basis to say, what do you say to Genghis Khan? If you don't have the basis to say Otto Benga is a human being because he's made in God's image, even if his brain looks different and his body is smaller, then you can't give meaningful and significant answers to the big questions of our age about racism, about genocide, about violence.
Thank you very much, Nick. You have a question?
My name is Sam again. I just want to direct my question to Mike. Your opening statement, Mike, made your premise quite difficult to comprehend. You did say the first living cells about 2 million years ago evolved, and you also mentioned the fact that language, rational mind, thought processes evolve as a result of that. Language is quite a complex faculty for the single cell to be able to evolve from that. And the question I want to ask is this: what's the distinction between evolution and natural selection? Because the scientific world and even the humanists confuse these two concepts. Can you please explain this?
You want to take that one, Mike?
Sorry, you think there's some confusion between evolution and natural selection?
No, not confusion. Make a distinction. I want you to make a distinction between evolution and natural selection.
Yeah, I mean, evolution was around long before Charles Darwin. His grandfather was a keen evolutionist, but Charles Darwin was able to put a mechanism onto how evolution worked, and it works by this natural selection. So I'm well aware of that. Biological evolution in that respect. But there is also cultural evolution. Evolution perhaps created by the evolving brain, and cultures change with time. And I'm not happy about Nick here quoting this Genghis Khan, because that was several hundred years ago, and culture has developed, man's brain has evolved in that time to be far more rational. And we talked about the process, the continuing journey. Evolution is a continuing journey, and we learn from the past and we rationalise what we need to do to make for a better future. This is the one part of being human, that we're able to think about past and future, which no other animal can do, as far as we know. Is there another question about?
Yes, you did mention the fact that the first living cell came into existence 2 billion years ago, and the evolution of language, concepts, thought, mind came as a result of that, which I am trying to disagree with you, that it's not possible for complexity like language, thought and mind to evolve from a single cell.
As far as I'm aware, this is just the evolution of the brain.
Hold on, let me see if we can clarify it a bit further. Are you referring to the fact that you would rather say God made Adam and Eve in his own image, rather than have cells evolve into human beings over 2 billion years?
I'm just trying to say that his premise is quite very weak. Point to say that language, thought and mind is a product of evolution. And what you're saying that Darwin talked about evolution, Darwin was actually speaking about natural selection, not evolution. Evolution suggests the fact that we have, there's no intermediate process in the evolutionary tree. If there's an intermediate process, we can use that to establish
the arguments or scientific basis of that facts of evolution. So that does not actually explain what you're trying to pass across.
Do you understand? So, what he's trying to say, and if I'm able to clarify better, is he believes that humans, as a result of evolution from cell, has a lot of holes in it, but rather there should be a better explanation from a humanist point of view of exactly how we came to be the way we are, as smart as we are.
Well, it is, I mean, evolution is a two-part process. One is the natural mutations that occur in the DNA that happens both throughout life and during the reproductive process, and so which gives a variation in the gene pool in any society, and in that society the fittest survive. So this process of evolution by natural selection is literally survival of the fittest of this group that are varied because of the genetic mutations that have occurred. So it's always survival of the fittest, and when the brain starts evolving, when if some very basic language in one group as opposed to no language in another group, there are going to be good reasons why the group with a bit of language and their ability to communicate with each other better, they survive, whereas other groups don't, and thus language develops. And similarly, other aspects of the way the brain works give benefits to that particular group that has got those genes in the gene pool. So this is how natural selection works.
Thank you. Jonathan, just a follow-up question from that. So, would you rather say, do you believe in the events in the first chapter of Genesis? Father should be clearer that way. As the true nature of how we have come to be here.
Do I believe that Genesis 1 really happened? Yes, of course, I'm a Christian. I believe in the authority of Scripture. Now, there's a whole different discussion as to how we interpret Genesis 1. That can take the lecture in itself.
You've got a minute.
I mean, I don't think that the early chapters of Genesis are at all inconsistent with an old earth. For example, each of the days of creation week begin with the phraseology, and God said, and God said, and God said. The first occurrence of which is in verse 3, by which time we've already got the heavens and the earth, because in verse 1 and 2 it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and so on. So by the time you even get to the first day of creation week, you've already got the heavens and the earth. So that's just the start. I mean, obviously, then you have to address the question, well, how old is the biosphere, which would take a long time to go into right now. But in terms of evolution itself, I'm a scientific proponent of what's called the theory of intelligent design, which is to say that there are certain features and properties of living systems which are best explained as a product of intelligent design rather than unguided, mindless processes of natural selection and random genetic mutation and so forth. So that's my own perspective. I reject common ancestry and the neo-Darwinian synthesis based on the scientific evidence and only the scientific evidence.
Thank you.
Could I make one comment to Mike about Genghis Khan? Mike's annoyed at my bringing up Genghis Khan a lot because he said, if I've got you correctly, our minds have evolved, so we're more civilized. Is that what you're saying? I would seriously question that. In the 20th century, for example, our minds evolved so well, we created atomic weapons. We dropped 2 on Japanese cities and eviscerated 250,000 people in seconds. We invented new state systems of communism. The Soviet Union killed tens of millions of its own people using new technologies of governance and control because these people didn't fit into the project of atheism that they were building. We've had, even in the lifetime of most of us here, we've had 5.5 million people died in the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The idea that we have somehow become so civilized that we no longer see killing on a mass scale as acceptable or even pleasurable, I think is belied by the facts of recent history. it's all the more important to be able to provide an answer to the question, why shouldn't we kill? Why shouldn't we kill on a mass scale? Why shouldn't we murder? And I would suggest, from what we've heard tonight, I think it is suggested, I would suggest that it's difficult to make those arguments if you don't posit the existence of a creator God who's made us in his image, and to whom every one of those 5.5 million people in the DRC, every one of those 250,000 people in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, etc., is of inestimable value to their creator.
Thank you. So we'll just take one more. Wow. Okay. Wow. We're going to try and make this very quick. Do you still have your question?
I don't know.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Don't just keep it. Email it. Wow. Okay. We're going to take just 2 questions, if that's okay. And I need you guys to be very quick with your question. I'll just start from the back. Because you haven't asked any question today. Can you please be quick with your question?
All right. Thanks, our speakers. Angelo, my question is directed to you. Amongst all other things, you said the Bible was homophobic, and you quoted Romans chapter 1, verse 27. And there the Bible was saying that men who slept with men receive the consequence of that. And the Amplified Version says they receive the consequence in their body. And we know that health-wise, the consequence of man and man coming together. For example, we know that it spread a disease such as AIDS. And the question is the Bible being truthful or being factual by telling us that if you bring these 2 people together, there's a negative consequence, or how will you explain that?
Angela, that question was directed to you.
Well, of course, there are various issues with many kinds of sexual activity, but to reach the point where we prohibit or make illegal certain kinds of sexual activity, especially when these commands come from God. This, I think, would justify my statement that this particular verse in the Bible and others as well can be found as to be homophobic. There is no reason why God would prohibit sex between 2 men or 2 women, as he allows and also praises the relationship between a man and a woman. So, of course, the problems you raised are merely come as a consequence of that, but I don't see that we should reach a point where we should make this illegal, but of course just advise people to do all kinds of sexual activities. But the fact that this is thought of as immoral and also illegal, it justifies the claim that this particular verse is homophobic.
Alright, I'm just going to stop so we can get the final question and we can have all the speakers have their final position at the moment. I can only take one question, my apologies. So one of you have to decide who's going to ask his own question. You've asked a question before, haven't you?
Another question.
Can we just give it to someone who hasn't asked the question before?
Okay,
my apologies.
Sorry, my name's Glenn Walker. I just wanted to say, because I know we're supposed to be very respectful in that, but getting more and more frustrated by some of the things I've heard. You said that, I think it was Nick said that some of the rules that are in the Bible, things that we would say are abhorrent today, were rules for the time. And then you take issue with the fact that we haven't progressed in our brains from Genghis Khan. How do you square what you've said about Genghis Khan with the atrocities that have been done in the name of God or gods across the ages? And we all know, that there have been some particularly hideous things done in the names of Christianity, particularly, but other religions as well. If you want an example, perhaps the Crusades.
Can you quickly add your question to it, so that just ask as well, so we just have
It's a very good question. You mentioned the Crusades. One of the most interesting things I've done in my life was to go on crusade apologies. The first crusade was 1096 to 1099. And between 1996 and 1999, a group of Christians walked the length of the first crusade, apologising to Jews and to Eastern Christians and to Muslims. So I would completely accept what you say, that the church has committed great atrocities in the name of Jesus. You mentioned the Crusades. I would think particularly about European colonialism and imperialism in conquering the Americas and wiping out native populations. Here's the difference. To the Crusaders, you could go and say, you are doing something that's wrong because this is what's written in Scripture. And in fact, at the time of the Crusades, the Franciscans, they had a third order who were pacifists. There were far more people who were signed up to the order of Franciscans. St. Francis opposed the Crusades than there ever were people who took part in the Crusades. So there were far more Christians, but we can tell, who were opposed to that and against that. And what St. Francis and what those people could say was, you are doing something that's against your faith because it says in Scripture, love your enemies. And that becomes a basis in revealed Scripture from God to make that argument. You could not say to Genghis Khan, you shouldn't do this because God says this, and he wouldn't accept this. You couldn't say to Stalin, my own work is particularly in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, a third of the Kazakh population died in Stalin's terror famines in the 20s and 30s. You couldn't say to Stalin, you shouldn't do this because it's against your principles. His argument would be that the greater good is creating socialism, creating the new man, and the remnants of the old order, the counter-revolutionaries, should be wiped out because they stand in the way. So I completely accept the arguments you made. Much of my work in the books I've written is critiquing the church and arguing with Christians for justifying war in the past and today. I can do that on the basis that God has revealed in Scripture we should love our enemies, and I'm interested in why the church compromises in that. You can't take a similar position with Genghis Khan or Stalin.
Thank you.
But not Genghis Khan, but maybe other atheists. But my point is, you're allowing the Christians, and justifying why the Christians have killed people.
So you're trying to justify why Christians have allowed humans, who are, as you say, infinitely valuable to God, to kill other human beings. I don't understand.
I would never ever justify that. For the first 3 centuries after Christ, the Christian church was resolutely pacifist. You were not allowed to join the church if you were a practicing soldier. If you'd been a soldier and killed, you were never allowed to become a priest. Christians were routinely executed for refusing to join the Roman army because they believed that Jesus taught them to love their enemies. So that was the testimony of the church, resolutely pacifist for centuries and centuries. The church lost that testimony at the time of Constantine when the Roman Empire co-opted religion to its use. One of the reasons that I'm a secularist, if you like, is that I don't believe that when the church is used to prop up a political order, whether that's Islamic State, more recently, whether that's the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, when the church does that, then it allows itself to be corrupted. It trades the gospel message that Jesus came, that Jesus died for everyone and rose again to create a community of people who love their enemies and share their goods. The church spread so rapidly in the first century. The historical study of this, it spread amongst slaves, it spread amongst women, it spread amongst the marginalised, who could recognise in the Christian message that they were valued, even though society said they were devalued. in time that changed as the Christian church became corrupted. So I would agree entirely with your observations. I would never justify Christian killing in any context. I think it's always inadmissible. And I'm very sorry that the church has lost, at many times and places, it's lost its commitment. It hasn't lived up to the way Jesus taught us to live. The response is always, because Scripture reveals a way to live, we're held to a higher standard and we can be fairly judged on that basis.
Thank you so much, Nick. So I'll have all the panelists give their final word for 2 minutes, and I am timing that, Jonathan. I'll start from Angelo.
Thank you very much. So, we've heard a lot of arguments today, and a crucial point that I would like to distinguish is, and it has been a failure to distinguish between some arguments I've heard, that is between a predetermined meaning in life and a no meaning in life. That it is wrongly assumed that not having a predetermined meaning in life means that life cannot have any meaning at all. And we have stressed that this connection cannot be made. Life can have meaning without some predetermined meaning to it. And it is wrong to believe that the only way for something to have meaning is to be created with that meaning in mind. I would say that creation has nothing to do with meaning, nor it means that something that was created with a particular purpose in mind must fulfill that particular purpose. And simply put, whether God created the world having a particular purpose in mind does not mean that life has to have the meaning for which it was created, or that beings that inhabit the world need to pursue that purpose and accept no other meaning in life other than the one that is imposed to them. And the belief that there is no meaning outside God is part of the mechanism which makes someone feel that they have an obligation to believe in God. And think for a moment, even with an objective meaning in life, despite the fact that there cannot be one even if God exists, one is not compelled to follow that meaning. But religion makes you feel that you have that obligation, and it stresses that there is punishment if you do not follow that particular path. In other words, you are not free to choose your own meaning, nor ignore God's will. But God is never to blame. And some arguments that we have made that it's impossible to find any absolute argument for prohibiting some behavior. Religion or the theistic arguments do not escape that. They are also unable to provide, even with God's existence and God's objective values, they are also unable to provide reasons of why certain behaviors are wrong. So, just a reminder that we should all act with aiming to maximize pleasure for all human beings and respect others for what they are. This is the maxims we should act.
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm just going to give it to Nick briefly. Nick, your final statement.
Okay. I don't know if any of you are readers of the novels of Kurt Vonnegut, American novelist. He wrote a great book called Breakfast of Champions. Now, imagine that Mike and I meet up in a pub, and I say, I've read this book, Breakfast of Champions, and I think it's really Breakfast of Champignons. It's about how to forage for and find and cook mushrooms and eat them for breakfast. Well, Mike says, no, that's nonsense. It's actually Egg Fest of Champions. It's about high-protein diets of Olympic athletes. And Mike mentioned to me the well-known fact that Michael Phelps, the greatest ever Olympian, arguably, used to have 3 fried egg sandwiches and a 5-egg omelette and 3 slices of eggy bread for breakfast. So we start arguing about the meaning of this book, and we're rolling on the floor, fighting, and then who should walk in the door but Kurt Vonnegut himself? And he asks us, what are you two jokers doing? I said, we're arguing about this book, what it means, and I say it's about French cuisine, and he says it's about the value of a high protein breakfast. And Kurt Vonnegut would say this, he'd say, "You're both wrong. I am the author of the book, and I can tell you its meaning. It's a novel about a character called Kilgore Trout, who's travelling to a ceremony to collect a publishing prize." So I think the question is, how do you judge between meanings? But the Christian message doesn't just leave it in the realm of ideas. My favourite scene in the book is where Kilgore Trout is in a bar after he's got his prize, and he's sitting there, and then he feels suddenly this strange sensation comes over him. And he looks into the corner, and he sees that through the doorway, Kurt Vonnegut himself, the author of the book, has entered into the story. The author wrote himself into the story. And that is the Christian claim. I said the last time I was in this building was for a service to commemorate Martin Luther King's death and life. And the next time I'll be here will be for the University Carol Service. And Carol services around the world contain a reading from St. John's Gospel. The Word, Jesus Christ, became flesh and dwelt amongst us. The Christian message isn't that we've been left to guess wildly and to grope blindly, but that the author of the human story, who fills time and eternity with his presence, who fashioned the cosmos and made you and me and every one of us, the Christian message is that he has walked into the pages of our life, not merely to help us understand what our meaning and purpose is, but to tell us that I made you, I know you, I love you, and I've come to find you, and the meaning of your life is to love me and to love those who I made in my image.
Thank you so much, Nick. We will go to Mike. Please let's try to keep it within time.
2 minutes. Just one little rebuttal before I start with the closing statement. And this is Nick's statement about personal God whose very nature is good. If we're talking about the Jesus-type God from the New Testament, there is a lot of value in that. I think the problem that Christianity has made is actually combining the Old Testament with the New Testament in basically the same book. Because revering God and keeping his commandments, most of those commandments are in the Old Testament, and some of them are awful, and people, including Christians, have chosen which of those commandments to keep and which not to keep. They've used their innate morality to do that. But, I mean, this debate has not been about whether God exists. Humanists don't believe in any God. The issue is whether people who do not believe in a God can have a meaningful life. Humanists believe that religious and non-religious individuals alike can lead meaningful, good lives because we all share the same human nature. We all are evolved social beings who share an innate morality. That innate shared morality has been used by lawmakers, community leaders, and people who historically have documented so-called holy scriptures to assist in keeping their communities under control. The morality that humans share today is very different from the morality that we share with other animals. It is more extensive and more demanding as a result of centuries of rational elaboration of its content. Humankind is gradually, over recent centuries, becoming more liberal, more tolerant, and more understanding of our fellow humans. Perhaps it is worth considering ourselves to be links in a chain of evolution, both genetic, cultural, and possibly scientific, which will lead ultimately to a technically advanced, peaceful society. If you believe the facts about evolution, then you must agree with us that you can lead a good life without God.
Thank you so much, Mike. And finally, Jonathan.
Well, thank you everyone for a spirited and engaging discussion. Unfortunately, I can't say everything I would like to say because I have 3 pages of rebuttal notes, so I'll try and keep my comments succinct and within the time. Now, in terms of, Mike interestingly said that he's not representing atheism tonight, he's representing humanism. Well, so he just told us humanists are atheists, right? I mean, it's a non-theistic religious system. Now, in terms of one of the
themes that came up quite regularly in our opponents' comments and remarks this evening were the evolutionary foundation for ethics. And I think that there's two key mistakes that are being made here. One is that it's confusing pragmatic value with moral value. And secondly, that it's confusing universality for objectivity. So let's take the first of those, confusing pragmatic value and moral value. So we can imagine many acts that help a person or species survive, but are nonetheless morally evil. For example, raping females could serve to further the survival of one's own genes or species, but that pragmatic concern does not make rape moral. Cowardice can also aid one's survival, but cowardice is not a moral virtue. It would be wrong then to assume that pragmatic goodness is identical to moral goodness. Actions that produce ends that we desire, such as survival, may be good in the pragmatic sense, but that says nothing about the moral virtue of the acts themselves. The moral virtue of the acts is a separate question. Secondly, confusing universality for objectivity. Well, it may be true that certain actions always result in a desired outcome for all who do them. The universality of this cause and effect relationship does not in itself make the behavior objectively good, because being universal is not the same thing as being objective. So I think there's two issues at that point. Angelos, in fact, went so far as to say that he doesn't think that moral truths exist, but my question at that point would be, does Angelos believe that we have progressed morally as a society? If he does, then I would like to understand how he makes that conclusion. And so, just in summation then, just to remind you of the contentions I made at the start, that number one, atheism cannot properly ground any notion of intrinsic moral value. 2, atheism cannot provide justification for objective moral norms and values. 3, atheism cannot provide justification for objective meaning and purpose. 4, only by embracing the truth of the gospel can we actually fulfill the objectively prescribed purpose for our lives. And finally, 5, a world in which the search for meaning is near universal is itself a clue to the existence of God. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. A round of applause for our panelists. So, conclusion, opinions, ideas, thoughts, all of these things are things we learn and face every day. Theism, atheism, morals, values, purpose, these are things that have been said here today. But the key thing I would like everyone to take out of this place is, whatever you believe in, whatever you strongly agree with, hold on to that as long as it aligns with having a purpose, living life, loving your neighbor, and being the best version of yourself that you can be. My name is Philip Megoran. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you very much. I want us to appreciate ourselves as well for being patient and listening to all this. Thank you very much. Give us a round of applause. Thank you very much. On behalf of my team at New Life Youth, thank you for coming around tonight, and wish you a very, very lovely night. Have safe travels back, and thanks to all our speakers for taking up our invitation. I really had a wonderful time. It's great to get to know them. Thank you very much, and see you soon.